Hello and welcome back to the only channel asking the hard-hitting questions, like how much weight can Wingardium Leviosa lift?
It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
Apparently 63% of you think it can lift at least a train, which brings me to the topic of today's video. I'm going to be looking at some of the most common spells used in the Harry Potter universe and give them a ranking from 1, which is basically a harmless party trick, to 5, something that has the potential to destroy the world, maybe? Or at the very least, unravel society as a whole.
Oh, well done!
So here's the criteria. 1, harmless party trick. 2, mildly abusable. 3, society bending. Things that make you wonder, why isn't everyone doing this? 4, collapse risk. This should be causing really substantial problems, but it's not for some reason. And lastly, 5, which is basically apocalypse. End of civilization stuff and the spells that should probably be causing it. I know someone's gonna comment like, it's just magic, don't worry about it. Yeah, obviously, I know, it's a fictional story, but what's the fun in that? So, restrain yourself, and let's jump into the first one. Transfiguration magic. When I was making this list, I originally had a couple different spells that were transfiguration type of magic spells, but ultimately, there doesn't seem like there's a lot of distinction between any of these spells. Some do certain things that others don't, but in the end, they're all kind of based on the same thing, which is turning one thing into another. And there's not a lot of distinction between all of those things, so I figured I should probably just talk about them as a whole, because the more I looked at them, the more problematic they became. At the very beginning, the first introduction we have to Transfiguration is in Harry's first year with Professor McGonagall. She says that Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. That sort of sets the stakes. Transfiguration can do a lot of things, including turning a desk into a pig, and potentially much more. So let's explore some of the worst case scenarios, and then we'll end up at a ranking for this. First is what I would call a risk of economic collapse. So the obvious topic is like creating gold. I think this is something that's restricted in some way. You'll often hear Gamp's law thrown out as a restriction for this. People couldn't create gold or things of value, but really the only limitation that's explicitly mentioned is creating food. A lot of people seem to interpret some of the other laws as gold or life or souls or something like that. But I think there's a bigger question here, which is, sure, maybe they can't make gold, but they could certainly make lots of things of value and still use them. On the extreme end, you have something like oil or some sort of like plastic material, something that can be used as a commodity and drops the value of these goods to 0 because the supply becomes infinite. There's not really an indication of whether or not things that are transfigured ever fade or return. In fact, in a lot of cases, it seems like it's permanent. Sure, I can't transfigure something into gold unless I have the Philosopher's Stone, but it seems like I could probably make like other useful materials and then sell them. Gamp's law, I guess, covers this again, but it's really not clear. It definitely doesn't go into detail about global commodity trading markets. Maybe the jury's still out on that one. The other potential would be for a bad actor to do something truly terrible. You could probably turn the air into poison at a pretty broad scale. The chances of someone being a bad actor seem pretty substantial in a way that would constantly put society on edge. We have an example of a terrorist, which is Voldemort, and he doesn't do something like this. So you have to assume that there's some sort of limit here. Like, you probably can't turn all of the air in a city into a neurotoxin or something. So there's presumably some kind of limit. But there's plenty of other things that you could turn into weapons. Like, you could turn trees into living soldiers, like Lord of the Ring Ent style. I don't know, really this is just potential for like a more interesting combat system in Harry Potter that we never see. except for maybe at the very end when McGonagall turns all the statues to life, and then they kind of don't seem to do a whole lot. Really, the topic I actually wanted to get into is this sort of biological horror story about this all, which is the idea that Transfiguration seems to be able to potentially create life and sentience. We'll look at the source material so you don't think I'm crazy, but I think things that are transformed seem to retain echoes of their original form. For example, in Goblet of Fire, maybe not, Thomas, but believe me, you need all the preparation you can get. Miss Granger remains the only person in this class who has managed to turn a hedgehog into a satisfactory pincushion. I might remind you that your pincushion, Thomas, still curls up in fright if anyone approaches it with a pin. So that's obviously going in reverse. That's turning a living thing into an object. It's kind of the worst case scenario I can imagine. It seems to imply that when you transfigure something into a stationary object, it's still living, which is horrific. But it also makes you wonder about the reverse. McGonagall turns her desk into a pig. You have to imagine that that pig has some sort of life force to it. Otherwise, like, what is it doing? Maybe it's an illusion. That's your sort of easy way out.
This is the magic trick, huh?
Illusion, Michael.
That it's not actually living, it's just an imitation of life. While that's possible, it sure doesn't seem like what's happening. The other problematic part about Transfiguration is that it seems to be permanent. This is from the Tales of Beetle the Bard, which says that animagi do not retain the power of human speech while in their animal form, although they keep all their human thinking and reasoning powers. This, as every school child knows, is the fundamental difference between an animagus and transfiguring yourself into an animal. In the case of the latter, one would become the animal entirely, with the consequence that one would know no magic. They'd be unaware that they had ever been a wizard and would need somebody else to transfigure them back to one's original form. Which also seems to imply that you could turn someone into an animal, or like a chair, and throw them into the woods. They'll never be seen again. Unless someone stumbles across a chair in the woods and thinks that could be a person. I don't know how anyone's gonna find that or realize that in the first place. Like, you could also turn them into a rock, because there's precedent for that as well. Barty Crouch Jr. in Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore told me to go look for my father. I went back to my father's body, watched the map. When everyone was gone, I transfigured my father's body. He became a bone. I buried it while wearing the invisibility cloak in the freshly dug earth in front of Hagrid's cabin. Clearly, there's not a whole lot of limitations here, and you can turn someone into something very small, which kind of breaks all other laws of physics, and that's kind of beside the point. You can turn someone into something much smaller and just bury it, or throw it in the ocean, or launch it on a spaceship into outer space. There's not a whole lot of things you couldn't do with this. Transfiguration as a whole seems to break pretty much every law of nature that we have, with the exception that maybe Gamp's Law comes in and saves the day and plugs the plot hole that is this branch of magic. You can't make food, you seemingly can't create wealth. That seems unclear though. And also, this whole branch of magic seems very skill dependent. You have to be a pretty powerful wizard to perform some of these feats. First year students aren't going to be doing something insane, but there's also plenty of adult witches and wizards that don't have good intentions that could do pretty bad things without all that much effort. Overall, I'm gonna kick this off with a 4 out of 5. I don't think it's necessarily going to like rip a hole in the space-time continuum. We'll get to that later. But I do think it has a lot of problems, and it probably should be a bigger issue in the wizarding world. The Age Line Charm. I made a post a while back asking for some of your suggestions about spells to include in this. A lot of them were already on the list, and I will get to them. One that I thought about but was not gonna do, but put back in because of a comment, was the Age Charm line. This is the one that shows up in Goblet of Fire. It's the charm that Dumbledore puts around the goblet to try to stop Harry from putting his name in the Goblet of Fire. To ensure that no underage student yields to temptation, said Dumbledore, I will be drawing an age line around the Goblet of Fire once it has been placed in the entrance hall. Nobody under the age of 17 will be able to cross this line. An age line, Fred Weasley said, his eyes glinting as they all made their way across the hall to the doors into the entrance hall. Well, that should be fooled by an aging potion, shouldn't it? And once your name's in the goblet, you're laughing. It can't tell whether you're 17 or not. What could be the problems with an age line? Off the bat, I think it's an incredibly niche spell. It does something incredibly specific, and honestly, it's pretty easy to circumvent. So it's really only stopping people below a certain age from crossing a point in space. It doesn't seem to affect other people, other adults, spells, you name it. It seems to have some limitations. And it's pretty easy to bypass. You just find someone to go through the spell for you. It's a little bit like a law stopping underage kids from buying beer at a gas station. You just find an adult to go buy it for you. I was trying to think about what's the most extreme case here, and I guess someone exceptionally powerful like Dumbledore could cast an age charm that would stop everyone beneath 100 years of age from passing it, so essentially blocking everyone. But that seems needlessly theatric to the point where it's like, just make a magical wall there that they can't run through. You don't need to do this age magic around it. Just stop them in the countless other ways that you could with magic. And really, even in the worst case scenario, it doesn't seem to cause any lasting problems. It makes Fred and George like grow beards and temporarily get older, but it's not like a permanent, it doesn't kill you. So I don't think it's really all that problematic. To the point of one of the commenters, it probably would put a bunch of bars out of business. I also don't think that like a powerful enough wizard would be stopped by it. If Dumbledore put a line on the ground that was supposed to keep Voldemort out, I just get a sense that he would have a spell to counter it in some way. All in all, I think this one falls very cleanly in the tier 1 category, which is really just a party trick. Does it stop people? Could it stop some underage kids? Yeah. Is it gonna break the world? Doubtful. 1 out of 5. Avada Kedavra. All right, so the spell you've probably been waiting for. Avada Kedavra. Kedavra? Someone yelled at me for saying Kedavra. We all know what it does. It's instant death if it connects. Surely I would put it in category 5, right? Not so fast. Let's take a look at it first. By all accounts, Avada Kedavra is undetectable. It just ends someone's life. Meanwhile, in the village of Little Hangleton, a maid was running along the high street, screaming that there were 3 bodies lying in the drawing room of the big house: Tom Riddle Sr. and his mother and father. The Muggle authorities were perplexed. As far as I'm aware, they do not know to this day how the Riddles died, for the Avada Kedavra curse does not usually leave any sign of damage. The exception sits before me, Dumbledore added with a nod to Harry's scar. At its core, Avada Kedavra is a murder spell. It's an undetectable, easy kill spell, but that's pretty much all it does. Yes, there's a ton of use cases if you were like an assassin trying to topple a government, but at the end of the day, we have guns and that doesn't tear the world down around it. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Avada Kedavra is any different than any other thing we can do to kill people. So, and in a lot of ways, it seems worse than the things that we've invented. There doesn't seem to be like a multi-casting version of Avada Kedavra. You can't cast it on 200 people at once, so it's really pretty like rate limited. It also has this same limitations that bullets would have, i.e. physical barriers. I have nothing more to say to you, Potter, he said quietly. You have irked me too often for too long. Avada Kedavra. Harry had not even opened his mouth to resist. His mind was blank, his wand pointing uselessly at the floor. But the headless golden statue of the wizard in the fountain had sprung alive, leaping from its plinth, and landed on the floor with a crash between Harry and Voldemort. The spell merely glanced off its chest as the statue flung out its arms, protecting Harry. Clearly there are ways to block it, in the same way that you could block a bullet. It has limitations. It's not just a free-for-all that has no counter. There's a seemingly outstanding question about whether you could conjure physical objects to block the spell as well, which would really take the fear down a notch of this spell. It's always talked about like it's unstoppable, but maybe through Transfiguration, you could sort of conjure up a chair in front of yourself and it would block the spell. Jury's out on that one too. The other barrier here to sort of ending society as a whole is this intent barrier. Avada Kedavra is really quite difficult to cast on someone. You have to, as far as I can tell, truly be a psychopath. You have to really want to do it. We see this in Goblet of Fire with Mad-Eye Moody, Imposter Mad-Eye Moody. Avada Kedavra is a curse that needs a powerful bit of magic behind it. You could all get your wands out now and point them at me and say the words, and I doubt I'd get so much as a nosebleed. You truly have to want to kill to be able to do this. A lot of other spells could cause someone to die without you having to have the intent. You could stupefy someone and they could fall down on the ground, and that could have the same effect. And 10-year-olds know how to do that.
Petrificus totalis.
I think it's pretty niche and not quite as problematic as you might first imagine. I'm gonna give it a 4, only because I do think there's a problem in that while there is a skill and intent barrier, everyone has a wand. There's not really like a background check that you have to do to get a wand. That I think could be problematic. Otherwise, it has some limitations. So, 4 out of 5. Accio. This is an interesting one. First, the groundwork. The best use case here is from Goblet of Fire, when Harry summons his broom during one of the Triwizard Tournament challenges. The crowd was making a great deal of noise, but whether friendly or not, Harry didn't know or care. It was time to do what he had to do, to focus his mind entirely and absolutely upon the thing that was his only chance. He raised his wand. "Accio, firebolt," he shouted. Harry waited, every fiber of him hoping, praying. If it hadn't worked, if it wasn't coming, he seemed to be looking at everything around him through some sort of shimmering, transparent barrier like a heat haze, which made the enclosure and the hundreds of faces around him swim strangely. And then he heard it. Speeding through the air behind him, he turned and saw his firebolt hurtling toward him around the edge of the woods, soaring into the enclosure and stopping dead in midair beside him, waiting for him to mount. Goblet of Fire, Harry uses Accio for the first time. He's been practicing, and finally it's time for the big moment, and he brings Firebolt to him so that he can win the challenge, and the rest is history. But that's a pretty crude use of the spell. I want to point out one other instance where it's used by Sirius Black. "That's right," said Sirius encouragingly. "Come on, let's all have a drink while we're waiting. Accio butterbeer." He raised his wand as he spoke, and half a dozen bottles came flying toward them out of the pantry, skidded along the table, scattering the debris of Sirius's meal, and stopped neatly in front of the 6 of them. They all drank, and for a while the only sounds were those of the crackling of the kitchen fire and the soft thud of their bottles on the table. That's an example of Accio being used with a lot of precision. It gathers multiple objects and places them pretty neatly directly in front of the people at the table in different locations. So surely this opens up the door for a lot of different potential exploits, right? We also know that it can move clothing on a person, so you could indirectly move a person through moving their clothing. You can also apparently move small creatures, but not humans. There also seems to be some ways to block the spell from working. Wonder Book of Spells tells us that Flatworthy did not believe in working and declared that the only dignified thing to do was to Accio more gold. This he attempted to do by pointing his wand in the direction of a nearby goblin workshop. In one sense, his plan worked. Several exquisite pieces of goblin jewelry, as yet unfinished, so without anti-theft charms upon them, came soaring in through the windows of the Accio Knights' headquarters. This implies that there is some sort of way to counter Accio, so you can't just summon anything you want, and really things of great value would definitely have some sort of counter spell placed on them. You can't just steal every artifact in the world. They would presumably be protected. I was pretty much ready to give this like a 3 out of 5 when I came across one other quote that kind of flipped the whole thing on its head and changed my mind entirely. It comes from a quote from J.K. Rowling, so this is all a bit of a grain of salt situation, but hear me out for a moment. She says, Accio only works on inanimate objects. While people or creatures may be indirectly moved by Accioing objects that they are wearing or holding, This carries all kinds of risks because of the likelihood of injury to the person or beast attached to an object traveling at close to the speed of light. So close to the speed of light. I don't really honestly know if it fits into my framework anymore, but immediately the first thing I thought about was this XKCD comic about the what would happen if you pitched a baseball at the speed of light. It basically turns into a nuclear bomb. The idea of Harry Accioing Firebolt and a relativistic missile coming at him from Hogwarts, and yeah, technically he probably wins the challenge in some way or another, but he could have potentially nuked all of Hogwarts, so I don't know if that makes him the winner or not, but it certainly makes Accio a spell worthy of a higher tier in my ranking system. Obviously, this isn't true. We can see it, like even in the text and in the movie version, both of them, the broom comes to Harry at a broom-like speed, so obviously this isn't coming towards him at the speed of light. That would be a ridiculous thing, and so I don't really know why she said it, because it's obviously not true, but I'm gonna rate this spell as if using it creates a intercontinental missile capable of wiping out an entire city. I can't remember the name of it. There is an opposite to Accioing something. There's like a banishing charm. It might just be called the banishing charm. Presumably that does it also at the speed of light. So you could banish a little pebble or a baseball towards a target at the speed of light and create, you get it, a bomb. At the end of it all, this is one of those things that clearly she's just saying without any understanding of what she's saying. Objects moving at the speed of light would be, I mean, there's also some cool applications for it. I guess there's like a Harry Potter set in space spin-off that wasn't on my bingo card, but space travel Harry Potter, I guess, is something that HBO could be cooking up. Realistically, it turns magic into weapons of mass destruction in a way that there could be no conflict anymore, because it'd be like mutually assured destruction. That doesn't even get into the fact that this is a spell that Harry knows at age 14. It's not even barred to the most talented wizards in the world. It's accessible to middle school children. So yeah, it's a problem. Probably a level 5 world-ending, earth-splitting problem. So I think that's where I'm gonna put it. If you don't believe what J.K. Rowling says, maybe it's like a 3. But if you do believe what she says, it's a 5. It's honestly, it's like a 6. It's beyond what I could possibly rank. Let's just leave it there and move on to the next one. Before we move on, if you're liking the video, click the like button or click the subscribe button. If you want to see more of this type of content, leave a comment, all those things, appreciate it. Yeah, that's it. On to the next one for real this time. All right, on to the next one. We're gonna be, what, oh. I can't avoid it. Here it comes. It's time travel magic. I really don't want to talk about time travel. It's probably the most annoying part of Harry Potter, if I'm honest, and it wriggles its way into every video that I ever make. But we're going to talk about it again. First, we'll talk mainly about the time turner. I actually have less and less of a problem with the time turner as I go on. Is it problematic? Yeah. Should she probably not have included it in the story? Yeah, probably. But like the way that time turners work, it is kind of just a single line of time. There's not any sort of going back to rewrite the past. So I don't have too many problems with it, except for the fact that as I was digging around, of course, I came across some problems. Time travel in Harry Potter was okay because it was contained. Whatever was gonna happen was gonna happen. It adheres to what I think would be called the Novikov self-consistency principle, which is if an event exists that would cause a paradox or any change to the past whatsoever, then the probability of that event is 0. Basically, if Harry wanted to go back and stop Voldemort, and that would cause a ripple effect through the future, the probability of that happening would be 0. There's no way to materially affect what's yet to happen. And that could be for a number of reasons. It might be that like Harry goes back to try to stop Voldemort, and As he approaches Voldemort, he trips and falls and knocks himself out. It could be some change of heart, anything. Something would stop him in some way, shape, or form from altering an event in the past that would have ripple effects on the future. This is essentially how the Time Turner works. Everything that Harry does has already happened because he has already done it. It's a closed loop. Great, except for the fact that Pottermore actually has a whole entry about time travel magic that exists outside of the Time Turners, because of course it does. And of course there are spells that break every law of consistency or coherence that you might have come to expect from time travel magic in Harry Potter. All attempts to travel back further than a few hours have resulted in catastrophic harm to the witch or wizard involved. It was not realized for many years why time travelers over great distances never survived their journeys. All such experiments have been abandoned since 1899, when Eloise Mintumble became trapped for a period of 5 days in the year 1402. Now we understand that her body had aged 5 centuries in its return to the present and was irreparably damaged. She died in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries shortly after we managed to retrieve her. What is more, her 5 days in the distant past caused great disturbances to the life paths of all those she met, changing the course of their lives so dramatically that no fewer than 25 of their descendants vanished in the present, having been unborn. Yeah, this pretty much is the exact thing people complain about with time travel magic with Harry Potter, that everyone was kind of like, yeah, that's a problem, but it's not actually a problem because that's not how Harry Potter does time travel, except that it is. This is the way that time travel works in Harry Potter, but for the Time Turner, they've just narrowed it to a small little snippet of time that is somehow contained to this single timeline thing. Realistically, it seems that there is a spell that allows time travel, and it creates the paradoxes that everyone complains about it creating. First of all, if she traveled back 600 years, there'd be like 20 to 30 generations impacted in the year 2000, so there'd be way more than 25 people disappearing. There'd be like thousands and thousands of people affected by this. I think there's a couple different scenarios here in the time travel logic. A, you can travel back in time and change things, but it branches off into a different timeline, and that's how you avoid the paradoxes. B, the actual way that it works in Prisoner of Azkaban is that it's a single line of time and you can't really change anything. You can think of time as a flowing river, and if you put a rock in there to divert the stream, it would just go around it and return to the natural timeline. A last option is that paradoxes happen, and if that's the case, there's a whole mess of issues that happen. So first, the branching thing. Imagine, for instance, that Harry goes back to stop Voldemort. So he goes back, he gets to age 18 or whatever, travels back in time to the night that his parents are killed by Voldemort, and stops him somehow. He alerts Dumbledore, who rescues him, they incapacitate Voldemort, kill him, I don't know. What happens then? At that point in time, it would branch, right? There would be timeline 1, where Voldemort continues on, and timeline 2, where Harry goes back and stops him. Does the Harry that traveled back stay in that branched timeline? So is there now 2 Harrys in timeline 2? Or does he somehow magically teleport back to timeline 1? Both have different problems. If he's in timeline 2, then there's 2 Harrys, and that's got its own host of issues, because anyone can do this. Remember, it wouldn't just be Harry. Anyone could do this magic. If you can imagine thousands and thousands of wizards all traveling around, creating paradoxes, I think the whole world would explode. Also, if time branches, then there's a moment when Harry goes back where time splits, and then there's a world where Voldemort still exists in the future that Harry doesn't exist in. And so is his Horcrux tied to a Harry in a different timeline? This is like some Marvel multiverse stuff that, like, who knows? I honestly don't know what grade to give this. It's clearly a 5. It's probably a 6. I don't really know. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, Schrodinger's spell. Every other 4 or 5 on this list destroy reality in a sort of causal way. They're like forward facing and don't introduce paradoxes into the universe. Most of them don't really do all that much damage except for, Accio faster than light relativistic missiles. I'm gonna give it a 5. only because of all the headaches that it causes me as I'm battling with people in the comments about this kind of stuff. So 5 just out of spite, and also this series shouldn't have time travel in it, period. So next one, Wingardium Leviosa. This was the spell that essentially kicked off this idea for the video, because it's not very clear what this spell does. It either does a little bit, or it does an insane amount of lifting that isn't reconcilable. Some people think the best it can do is lift something like the troll club that Ron and Harry lift in Philosopher's Stone. Others think it could lift as much or more than a train. How much bigger could it get? There has to be a limit here, otherwise this is a ridiculous spell. So I think the clearest, most realistic example of it happens in Deathly Hallows when Harry is in the midst of the Battle of Seven Potters. In desperation, Harry pointed his wand at the sidecar and shouted, "Wingardium Leviosa." The sidecar rose like a cork, unsteerable but at least still airborne. He had but a split second's relief, however, as more curses streaked past him. The 3 Death Eaters were closing in. "I'm coming, Harry," Hagrid yelled from out of the darkness, but Harry could still feel the sidecar beginning to sink again. Crouching as low as he could, he pointed at the middle of the oncoming figures and yelled, "Impedimenta." The jinx hit the middle Death Eater in the chest. For a moment, the man was absurdly spread-eagled in midair as though he had hit an invisible barrier. One of his fellows almost collided with him. Then the sidecar began to fall in earnest. The remaining Death Eater shot a curse so close to Harry that he had to duck below the rim of the car, knocking out a tooth on the edge of his seat. I think this is the most obvious example of what this spell does. It seems to just sort of lift things uncontrollably. Harry lifts the cart that he's in. He doesn't lift himself, but the cart becomes basically a bobbing cork in water. It's not a flying machine that he's enchanted. There's other limitations, as pointed out in some other source material like the Wonder Book. The new demonstration was initially much more successful than the first. Hobbart showed the onlookers how he could lift a variety of objects, ranging from small rocks all the way up to fallen trees. Now, that's a huge range as well. A tree is not quite the size of a train, but it's still a potentially very large object. The only distinction that any of this makes seems to be that it's impossible to cast it on a human, which would mean you can't just make yourself fly or make somebody else fly. But it also seems like there's some control possible, because in Deathly Hallows, Ron also cast this on a little twig. Ron looked around and then directed his wand at a twig on the ground and said, "Wingardium Leviosa." The twig flew up from the ground, spun through the air as if caught by a gust of wind, then zoomed directly at the trunk of the willow's ominously swaying branches. It jabbed at a place near the roots, and at once, the withering tree became still. Maybe he can control it because it's a small branch versus when Harry just lifts the huge sidecar that he's in. Maybe the weight determines what's possible in terms of control, but none of this really explicitly calls out the limit of how much or how large of an object can be lifted. Worst case scenario, you could cause some damage with this. You could drop heavy objects on things or people or whatever, and I think you need to maintain concentration for this spell to continue working. Harry in the sidecar is a perfect example. As soon as he starts being distracted, the sidecar begins to fall. So it's not something that you can just indefinitely keep up and defy gravity and reality in that sense. It takes effort and concentration to do so. The one thing I wanted to point out that just becomes more and more apparent as you dig into this stuff is that, like, there's a ridiculous amount of redundancy here. Hermione hovers Harry into a bed when he's like knocked out in a different situation using a hover charm, which seems to be distinct from Wingardium Leviosa, but it's like another hyper-specific spell that does one specific thing. There's also a flying charm for brooms, which is distinct, and maybe it's distinct from the one that Arthur Weasley casts on his car to make it fly. Then it begs the obvious question about brooms of, like, if it's the same spell, why is one broom better than other brooms? Does the spell get better? Is there someone casting it more effectively on something? And there's also the issue of the fact that when Arthur Weasley's car flies, it also seems to be sentient to some degree. I don't know if that's part of the spell, but it is actively and consciously making decisions. That's not really the point of this topic, but it is something that you just start to notice more and more. There's like 17 spells that do exactly the same thing or some slight variation of the same thing. It almost feels like none of this was really all that planned out. At the end, what grade does it get? I was like on the verge of giving it a 1, but I do think there is some versatility and like utility that you do get out of the spell that makes it a little bit more than a 1. So I'm gonna land on a 2 out of 5 for this one. In the most realistic sense, you could create some sort of like perpetual energy machine, but when you have magic, I think there's way easier ways to do that than with like floating a ball and dropping it repeatedly. So I don't think there's that much of a problem with this spell. I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. Alohomora. Okay, a very simple spell that actually has quite a bit wrapped up into it that is maybe less about the spell and more about J.K. Rowling's world building ability, but let's get into it. So, Alohomora obviously unlocks things. The healer pointed her wand at the door of the Janus Thicky ward and muttered Alohomora. The door swung open and she led the way inside, keeping a firm grasp on Gilderoy's arm until she had settled him into an armchair beside his bed. So the spell opens doors, seemingly ones that have maybe been magically locked, but not physically locked, or maybe some combination. It's quite confusing. There's like 3 different spells that all do the similar thing, just like what I was just talking about. So the other one is Colloportus, which closes doors, and I think stops you from physically opening them, but you could magically open them. And then there's also an anti-Alohomora spell, which stops Alohomora from working. Maybe doesn't stop you from physically busting the door down. I don't know. It all seems a little bit redundant and semantic, but whatever. The thing I actually want to talk about is the origin of Alohomora. J.K. Rowling claims that it's a West African word that means friendly to thieves, which on the surface, whatever, it seems whatever. But this comes from a transcript of a lawsuit between J.K. Rowling and another group trying to publish what I think was essentially a Harry Potter encyclopedia, and she doesn't want them to do that. So the quote is, J.K. Rowling said it came from a West African word that meant friendly to thieves, and not the Hawaiian aloha, as mentioned by the lexicon, the thing that she's suing. In cross-examination, David Hammer asked her if she had ever said publicly or told Steve Vander Ark the derivation of the word. She said there is a much easier way to find out, and that is to do some actual research. That's fine, except for the fact that this doesn't seem to be true at all. This seems entirely made up. It's not based on a West African word. It's actually a Malagasy word from Madagascar. She claims that it's from Sidiki, which is a West African name, which is not true. She probably meant Sakiti, a form of divination practiced in Madagascar. Sakiti itself is not a name, but a divination practice, within which there is a figure known as, I think, Alohomora, which means diviner, crowd, mob, grief, or trouble. You basically cast die or draw lines or something like that, and you see these figures that have some sort of meaning. Alohomora is one of these figures that can loosely be translated maybe to the interpretation of friendly to thieves or trouble ahead, that type of interpretation. Maybe she just sort of mixed things up at the time of testimony, but it's strange when it's in a trial about the origin of the word to get your own origin incorrect and then claim that they just have to do research to understand it the right way. Maybe that's a separate issue. Let's move on to Colloportus, which is the opposite. It seems to make doors so they can't be opened, even though they can be opened with Alohomora. Colloportus, shouted Harry, and he heard 3 bodies slam into the door on the other side. It doesn't matter, said a man's voice. There are other ways in. We've got them. They're here. Harry spun around. They were back in the brain room, and sure enough, there were doors all around the walls. He could hear footsteps in the hall behind them as more Death Eaters came running to join the first. Luna, Neville, help me. The 3 of them tore around the room, sealing the doors as they went. Harry crashed into a table and rolled over the top of it in his haste to reach the next door. Colloportus. This is a separate spell that seems to do the opposite of Alohomora, except that Alohomora can't be used because you would assume if the guy crashed in the door, he would have just cast the spell that opens it. This is either the same or different than the next one on the list, which is the anti-Alohomora spell, which is invented by a wizard named Blagden Blay because he got robbed 19 times in a day or something. This is also called out separately in Order of the Phoenix when Harry is trying to break into Umbridge's office to use the flute. And how are you going to get there in the first place? Harry was ready for this question. Sirius's knife, he said. Excuse me? Christmas before last, Sirius gave me a knife that'll open any lock, said Harry. So even if she's bewitched the door so Alohomora won't work, which I bet she has, then his knife will work. Clearly there's a way to protect against it. I don't know if it's different than the Colloportus spell, which seems to just be a spell that's based on shutting doors. It seems a little bit useless, but whatever. In Half-Blood Prince, they try to open a door again with Alohomora. Alohomora, he said confidently, pointing his wand at the padlock, but nothing happened. That won't work on these, said Tonks. Dumbledore bewitched them himself. There's clearly ways to protect against Alohomora. It might be an anti-Alohomora spell, it could be Colloportus. There's also a fourth spell called Aberto, which only gets used in the movies, and I think the only role for this is to open a door and not to unlock one, which feels like the most useless spell you could possibly have, but I guess we have motion sensing doors and it's not all that different. So anyway, at the end of all this, Alohomora doesn't seem to work past like book 2 on anything. I'm gonna give it a ranking that corresponds with that uselessness, and I'm gonna give it a 2. Overall, not a great spell. Useful, more than just a party trick, but not that great. Apparition. This was a pretty common suggestion. Apparition is essentially the Wizarding World's version of teleportation. It's instantaneous, it can transport you vast distances, though there are some limits, and it seems to not really require all that much skill. It seems to hinge on what's described as the 3 Ds: destination, determination, and deliberation. The important things to remember when apparating are the 3 Ds, said Twin Cross: destination, determination, deliberation. Step 1, fix your mind firmly upon the desired destination, said Twin Cross. In this case, the interior of your hoop. Kindly concentrate on that destination now. Step 2, said Twin Cross, focus your determination to occupy the visualized space. Let your yearning to enter it flood from your mind to every particle of your body. Step 3, called Tin Cross, only when I give the command, turn on the spot, feeling your way into nothingness. Move with deliberation. This is when they're first learning how to apparate, and even though it takes some time for people to learn, it doesn't feel like it takes all that much skill to do. They're teaching it to essentially 16-year-olds. It's like driving a car. Dangerous maybe, but everyone learns how to do it. It also seems to make a noise, a crack or a bang when people do it. Unless, of course, you're Dumbledore and you're really good at magic. A man appeared in the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. This was also book 1 though, so I don't even know if J.K. Rowling had a name for apparition at that point. Regardless, we see it in later books as well. Voldemort and Dumbledore both can apparate without making any noise whatsoever. So there are the similar problems with this that you have with any other means of causing chaos or destruction. Basically, it'd be a great assassination tool, but past that, I think it has a lot of limitations that really stop it from being as problematic as you might initially assume. For one, there's huge limitations on the distance that you can apparate. Apparation becomes increasingly unreliable over very long distances, and only highly skilled wizards are wise to attempt it across continents. That said, J.K. Rowling says cross-continental jumps actually might kill you. Apparition becomes increasingly risky over long distances. As with most magic, much depends on the skill of the spellcaster. Apparition requires knowledge of the terrain to which one is moving, or the ability to visualize it clearly. Cross-continental apparition would almost certainly result in severe injury or death. So maybe only the most powerful people could even try this to begin with, although, that said, we have a different instance where Voldemort could have apparated but chose to fly instead. This happens in Deathly Hallows I believe when Harry is at Malfoy Manor and Voldemort's coming to get him. Harry knew it. His scar was bursting with the pain of it, and he could feel Voldemort flying through the sky from far away over a dark and stormy sea. And soon he would be close enough to apparate to them, and Harry could see no way out. There's clearly a range wherein it doesn't make any sense for you to apparate, or it's so dangerous that you shouldn't, even if you're Voldemort or Dumbledore, which puts a pretty hard limit on how much damage this could really do. And speaking of damage, let's get into what happens if you do it wrong. Splinching seems to be the main problem. The second attempt was no better than the first. The third was just as bad. Not until the fourth did anything exciting happen. There was a horrible screech of pain, and everyone looked around terrified to see Susan Bones of Hufflepuff wobbling in her hoop with her left leg still standing 5 feet away from where she had started. The heads of house converged on her, there was a great bang and a puff of purple smoke, which cleared to reveal Susan sobbing, reunited with her leg, but looking horrified. Splinching, or the separation of random body parts, said Wilkie Twincross dispassionately. It occurs when the mind is insufficiently determined. You must concentrate continuously upon your destination and move without haste, but with deliberation. I would assume that the problem with traveling a long distance is that you would be splinched to a degree that you could not return. I don't know what happens if, you splinch a vital organ, and I would assume that the farther you go, the more likely that kind of issue could happen. With that in mind, I think what realistically happens with Apparition is that most witches and wizards probably just avoid it because of the dangers. They use things that are probably safer, like traveling through the fireplace flue networks, or flying on a broom, or something that doesn't have a risk of death if you get distracted at the last moment. Really, the only people we see doing it are essentially soldiers in the wizarding world. They're Aurors and the wizard cops. Normal people don't seem to do it quite as much. There's also ways to block Apparition. Famously, Hogwarts is a place that you can't apparate in and out of, so Dumbledore has some sort of spell that can block it. So there's all kinds of limitations here. The one question I really do have is, I feel like you could chain apparitions together. You might not be able to apparate across a continent, but couldn't you just apparate a mile at a time and do it in quick succession? I don't think there'd be all that much of an issue. Clearly you can go a decent number of miles within one jump. So even if you go 30 miles and then rest for 10 minutes and then go 30 more miles, you're still going way faster than a broom probably goes. So you could do it, rest, do it again, and you'd travel quite quickly. All that said, it's probably safer to just go through the Floo network or take a train or something. Realistically, I'm giving Apparition a 3 out of 5. I don't think it causes huge problems. It's basically just fast traveling. I don't think that necessarily breaks society apart. And there's a whole lot of things stopping everyone from doing it all the time, and inherent dangers, because frankly, I think most people in the wizarding world probably aren't all that good at magic to begin with. So it doesn't surprise me that not everyone is apparating all the time. 3 out of 5. Fiendfyre. This is a really interesting spell on the list. Fiendfyre conjures what is described as sentient and uncontrollable fire. It turns into creatures that basically consume everything in its path. We really only have one example of it being used, and it's cast by Crumb in the Deathly Hallows, and here it is. Like it hot, Scum roared Crabbe as he ran, but he seemed to have no control over what he had done. Flames of abnormal size were pursuing them, licking up the sides of the junk bulwarks, which were crumbling to soot at their touch. Aguamenti, Harry bawled, but the jet of water that soared from the tip of his wand evaporated in the air. Run! Malfoy grabbed the stunned Goyle and dragged him along. Crabbe outstripped them all, now looking terrified. Harry, Ron, and Hermione pelted along in his wake, and the fire pursued them. It was not normal fire. Crabbe had used a curse of which Harry had no knowledge. As they turned a corner, the flames chased them as though they were alive, sentient, intent upon killing them. Now the fire was mutating, forming a gigantic pack of fiery beasts, Flaming serpents, chimeras, and dragons rose and fell and rose again, and the detritus of centuries on which they were feeding was thrown up into the air into their fanged mouths, tossed high on clawed feet, before being consumed by the Inferno. So it's this terrifying spell that seems to be capable of causing this mass destruction. But the other thing that it's capable of destroying is Horcruxes. A blood-like substance, dark and tarry, seemed to be leaking from the diadem. Suddenly, Harry felt the thing vibrate violently, then break apart in his hands. And as it did so, he thought he heard the faintest, most distant scream of pain, echoing not from the grounds or the castle, but from the thing that had just fragmented in his fingers. It must have been the Fiendfyre, whimpered Hermione, her eyes on the broken pieces. Sorry? Fiendfyre. Cursed fire. It's one of the substances that destroy Horcruxes, but I would never, ever have dared use it. It's so dangerous. We have a problem. It's potentially one of the most dangerous substances that is in existence in the wizarding world, and it's cast by Crabbe, who, by all accounts, I don't think is a very accomplished wizard. Not only is it pretty much impossible to extinguish, because the caster has to have control over it, and you can't just douse it with water, but it also seems to be capable of destroying pretty much everything in its path. Unlike some of the other unforgivable spells like Avada Kedavra and Imperio and Crucio, those seem to have this intent barrier that you have to cross. You have to really mean it to have the spell work. Fiendfyre seems to be something that pretty much anyone can learn how to cast and cause death and destruction all around them. As a side note, I kind of wonder if in the movie version, that's what Voldemort turns the fire into the snake scene. I wonder if that's Fiendfyre, just shown earlier on than we're shown it in Deathly Hallows. But certainly this spell is very deadly. It kills Crabbe, so at the very least, it's capable of killing people, obviously. There's one little anecdote I found about this. There are these Harry Potter toy wands that you could buy that could cast different spells, and they had 30 or 50 spells that you could learn how to cast based on what you said and the motion that you did with it.
And draw the shape.
You couldn't cast Avada Kedavra with it, which I guess is not all that surprising, but they did allow you to cast Fiendfyre, this deadly spell. I wish I could have been in the room when they were deciding which spell should we let people cast. Fiendfyre seems like it shouldn't have made the list, and it could have been a more family-friendly fire spell, but I guess they went with Deathfire instead. So what's the worst case scenario here? I think worst case scenario, it's this uncontrollable fire that escapes into the wild and burns a whole city to the ground, because honestly, I think there are probably very few witches or wizards that could stop Fiendfyre from advancing. So I could imagine it being cast in an open area and just kind of demolishing everything. The Room of Requirements probably contains it in some sense and stops it from breaking into the rest of the castle, because clearly Harry doesn't know how to extinguish it. And it really gets back to the main point that I think most witches and wizards in this world probably are not that skilled. It's just the wizard cops that know how to do this stuff. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, this is not necessarily a world-breaking spell. It's just a very damaging spell, so it's not going to be a 5, but I think it's reasonable to give it a 4. And mainly because it seems incredibly easy to cast, incredibly dangerous, and essentially it's just a low intent and skill barrier, and a very high bar for destruction that seems to be at just about everyone's fingertips, wand tips. It's very easy to cast and cause damage, so we'll give it a 4 out of 5. Crutiatus Curse. The Crutiatus Curse is obviously one of the unforgivable spells. The only purpose of the spell is to cause harm. In this case, it's basically a torture spell. So let's break down what it actually does and what grade I think it actually deserves. I've already done Avada Kedavra, and that was a 4, so we'll see what we come up with here. The best quote to describe it comes from Goblet of Fire when Voldemort captures Harry in the graveyard. Voldemort raised his wand, and before Harry could do anything to defend himself, before he could even move, he had been hit again by the Crutiatus Curse. The pain was so intense, so all-consuming that he no longer knew where he was. White-hot knives were piercing every inch of his skin. His head was surely going to burst with pain. He was screaming more loudly than he had ever screamed in his life. So it causes intense pain to a degree that seems to be worse than anything else that Harry can imagine or has experienced. But that said, there's a lot of ways that people cause pain without magic. At first blush, I don't really know that it deserves that high of a ranking. The other things it can do, seemingly, is to break memory charms. She told me many things, but the means I used to break the memory charm upon her were powerful, and when I had extracted all useful information from her, her mind and body were both damaged beyond repair. She had now served her purpose. I could not possess her. I disposed of her. So Voldemort does a variety of things to read Bertha Jorkin's mind through either torture or mind reading or all the above, and the end result is that it does cause irreparable damage and harm. So it's not necessarily just temporary pain. This is the same thing that happens with Neville's parents, where they've been tortured so much that they end up in a psych ward essentially for the rest of their lives, and we see Neville visiting. But like some other spells, like Avada Kedavra, there is this intent barrier here. Harry tries several times to cast Crucio, and doesn't always succeed. Never used an unforgivable curse before, have you, boy? She yelled. She had abandoned her baby voice now. You need to mean them, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain to enjoy it. Righteous anger won't hurt me for long. I'll show you how it's done, shall I? I'll give you a lesson. This is Bellatrix Lestrange telling Harry how to effectively cast a Crutiatus Curse, which Harry tries multiple times in different scenarios to do and isn't able to. Which does beg the question of what is the purpose of unforgivable spells being punished by Azkaban if Harry can kind of get away with doing it. But the fact that all this is basically limited by skill and intention means that I don't think this spell has that much potential to cause damage. It's basically enhanced interrogation techniques like George Bush Guantanamo Bay style stuff.
Now watch this drive.
Ultimately, I don't think Cruciatus is deserving of that high of a grade. Frankly, I don't know if it's even deserving of a 4. I think I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5 just because it's so difficult to cast, only affects one person at a time. There isn't like mass Cruciatus curses you can do. If everyone started trying to use the spell, surely that would be a problem, but at that point, I think you have bigger problems in society than just like the fact that the Cruciatus Curse exists. 3 out of 5. Still bad, but really not that much worse than a lot of other things that are going on. Bombarda. This is actually about more than just Bombarda. I'm including Bombarda, Confrigo, and Expulso all in the same category because it's all just 3 spells that make stuff go boom. And this is another example of extreme redundancy in the magical world of Harry Potter, and let's talk about that a little bit more. Basically, all 3 of those do the same thing. Confrigo seems to be, maybe it's like a fiery explosion, Bombarda is just like a concussive force, and Expulso is also just a concussive force. I don't really know what the difference is between them. We can at least look at the source material to kind of eke out some differences, and then we'll figure out how bad they actually are. Let's start with Confrigo. There's 2 examples in the text that I can find. One, when Harry blows up the sidecar in the Battle of Seven Potters, and the second is when Hermione tries to blow up Nagini later on in Deathly Hallows. A huge hand seized the back of Harry's robes and hoisted him out of the plummeting sidecar. Harry pulled his rucksack with him as he dragged himself onto the motorbike seat and found himself back to back with Hagrid. As they soared upward away from the 2 remaining Death Eaters, Harry spat blood out of his mouth, pointed his wand at the falling sidecar, and yelled, Confrigo. Confringo. He knew a dreadful, gut-wrenching pang for Hedwig as it exploded. The Death Eater nearest it was blasted off his broom and fell from sight. His companion fell back and vanished. And then we have the example with Nagini. The snake lunged as he took a running leap, dragging Hermione with him. As it struck, Hermione screamed, Confringo, and her spell flew around the room, exploding the wardrobe mirror and ricocheting back at them, bouncing from floor to ceiling. Harry felt the heat of it sear the back of his hand. Glass cut his cheek as, pulling Hermione with him, he leapt from the bed to broken dressing table and then straight out of the smashed window into nothingness, her scream reverberating through the night as they twisted in midair. So 2 examples that seems to be some sort of fiery explosion that is cast out. Again, what the difference is between all of these things, is not super clear, but the other one we have is Bombarda, which is used a couple different times. Umbridge uses it in the movie version. She uses Bombarda Maxima, which breaks into the Room of Requirements, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the Room of Requirements, but that's just the movie, so, whatever, forget it. It still just seems to be a sort of concussive blast. I think Hermione uses it in Prisoner of Azkaban at some point as well to, break Sirius out of the tower. Expulso, Harry uses to blow up a table, which seems exactly the same as Bombarda. Expulso bellowed the Death Eater, and the table behind him, which Harry was standing, blew up. The force of the explosion slammed him into the wall, and he felt his wand leave his hand as the cloak slipped off him. So it wasn't Harry, but a Death Eater used Expulso, and it explodes a table. So it's like the same. All three of these things are just explosions, which gets basically to my point. They're just explosions. I don't think they're really all that bad. They don't tear a rift in space-time. They don't create infinite money. They don't turn inanimate objects into living beings. The real world still has things that make other things go boom. So it's really not, I don't think, that deep of a spell. I don't think it causes really all that many problems. That said, there is still a reason to give it somewhat of a higher ranking because they're easy spells to cast. Harry and Hermione are casting them at age 13. They're obviously destructive to some degree, but seemingly the only way you could abuse them would be in breaking and entering things or bank heists. Really not that many applications that would be all that harmful to society. Also, as I was looking at this, there's one more, which is De Primo, and Hermione uses it to specifically explode a floor. So that's another explosion spell, but this one only explodes ground, which I guess is the ceiling to someone below you. So I don't know how you square that peg, square that. I don't know how you square those two things in your head, but from the caster's perspective, I guess it only is used to destroy floors and not ceilings, which presumably has a different spell. And I guess there's probably a spell for the north wall, the south wall, the west wall, and the east wall. So who knows anymore? 3 out of 5, good blowing up spells, but past that, not a whole lot. Legilimens. Legilimens, if you don't remember, or Legilimency, is Harry Potter's version of mind reading. Although they will explicitly tell you that it is not mind reading, even if that doesn't necessarily always seem to hold true. Here's what Dumbledore tells Harry. The Dark Lord is highly skilled at Legilimency. What's that, sir? It's the ability to extract feelings and memories from another person's mind. He can read minds, said Harry quickly, his worst fears confirmed. You have no subtlety, Potter, said Snape. Only muggles talk of mind reading. The mind is not a book, to be opened at will and examined at leisure. Thoughts are not etched on the inside of skulls to be perused by an invader. The mind is a complex and many-layered thing, Potter, or at least most minds are. He smirked. It is true, however, that those who have mastered Legilimency are able, under certain conditions, to delve into the minds of their victims and to interpret their findings correctly. The Dark Lord, for instance, almost always knows when somebody is lying to him. Only those skilled in occlumency are able to shut down those feelings and memories that contradict the lie, and so utter falsehoods in his presence without detection. So, sorry, I guess this is Snape telling Harry. Basically, this is like a mood ring that you can read people's emotions and feelings and the general shape of their thoughts, but not necessarily their individual thoughts at a word-by-word level. It's also worth saying that this seems to be perhaps one of the most difficult skills for a witch or wizard to use or learn how to use. Legilimens and occlumency seem to be just about as difficult as it gets for spells. So in a worst case scenario, someone that is skilled in this, like Voldemort, basically could rise to power uninhibited. They could spy, they could manipulate people, they could do just about anything they want to by reading the minds of those around them and reacting proactively. The other thing it's super useful for is dueling. Harry sees this when he's fighting Snape in The Half-Blood Prince. In Carsa, Harry roared, but Snape deflected the spell with an almost lazy flick of his arm. Fight back, Harry screamed at him. Fight back, you cowardly... Coward, did you call me, Potter? Shouted Snape. Your father would never attack me unless it was 4-on-1. What would you call him, I wonder? Stupa. blocked again and again until you learn to keep your mouth shut and your mind closed, Potter, sneered Snape, deflecting the curse once more. Now come, he shouted at the huge Death Eater behind Harry. It's time to be gone before the Ministry turns up. Snape, obviously skilled at Legilimens and Occlumency, is able to read Harry's mind and know what he's about to cast, or even know that he's about to cast something before he does so. He can proactively act to stop Harry from casting any spells. I think where this gets most problematic is the fact that most people probably can't defend against this. Harry tries, and he's good at pretty much every other thing that he does in the magical world, but he can't stop Voldemort from reading his mind. And so I think that in most cases, this would be pretty difficult to defend against. Although I would guess that most people in a position of power would have at least some training in this. Politicians would have some training to stop their minds from being easily read. Maybe someone super skilled could still do it, but I think they would be able to stop at least the most casual mind readers from reading their emotions and thoughts. In a dueling scenario, it seems pretty unbeatable unless both combatants know how to do this. Otherwise, it's just like rock, paper, scissors, but you go a second after they go and you see what they throw. All in all, it's a pretty powerful skill, and if everyone in society was using it, you basically devolve into like a zero trust society and things could break down pretty quickly. I don't think that's super likely to happen because, again, this is a difficult skill to use, but I'm still going to give it a 4 out of 5 just for the potential of destabilizing communities and society and global trust in leadership and politics. And you don't really need a spell to do any of that, but I think this would accelerate that pretty substantially. So 4 out of 5. Obliviate. Obliviate was a pretty often requested one for me to talk about because it's got some pretty obvious implications that are pretty dramatic, so let's get into it. I think the first example we see from this is actually pretty problematic for the wizarding world as a whole. It comes from Goblet of Fire when Harry and the Weasleys show up to the Quidditch World Cup. At that moment, a wizard in +4s appeared out of thin air next to Mr. Roberts' front door. "Obliviate," he said sharply, pointing his wand at Mr. Roberts. Instantly, Mr. Roberts' eyes slid out of focus, his brows unknitted, and a look of dreamy unconcern fell over his face. Harry recognized the symptoms of one who had just had his memory modified. "A map of the campsite for you," Mr. Roberts said placidly to Mr. Weasley, "and your change." "Thank you very much," said Mr. Weasley. The wizard in +4s accompanied them to the gates to the campsite, and he looked exhausted. His chin was blue with stubble, and there was a deep purple shadow under his eyes. Once out of earshot of Mr. Roberts, he muttered to Mr. Weasley, "Been having a lot of trouble with him. Needs a memory charm 10 times a day to keep him happy. And Ludo Bagman's not helping, trotting around talking about bludgers and quaffles at the top of his voice. Not a worry about anti-muggle security. Blimey, I'll be glad when this is over. See you later, Arthur." This is the second time, I guess. We see it the first time with Lockhart in Chamber of Secrets, but this time, they're just like obliviating this muggle because he happens to be at the campsite that I think he owns, and they're just doing it 10 times a day. That cannot have good long-term effects on his mind, but they seem to just be doing it consistently every day. For the life of me, I don't really understand why they didn't just like send him on a magical vacation or something. Conjure up a cruise ticket and send him somewhere else instead of just like wiping his mind every 60 minutes. That seems insane to me. But anyway, Obliviate, at least in Goblet of Fire, seems to do potentially two things: both erase memories and potentially alter them. I think in the later books, those might be like separate spells technically, but at least in Goblet of Fire, they seem to be one and the same. So there are a number of issues to talk about here. First is the potential for the government or a large organization to sort of erase something from history. From the Pottermore article about the Hogwarts Express, where exactly the Hogwarts Express came from has never been conclusively proven, although it is a fact that there are secret records at the Ministry of Magic detailing a mass operation involving 167 memory charms and the largest ever mass concealment charm performed in Britain. This is like essentially like the perfect fodder for conspiracy theories, I guess. The government covering something up and wiping everyone's memory and then concealing it. This is what conspiracies are made of. But I also want to point out how poorly Obliviate can go if cast incorrectly or without much skill. This seems to be the case with Lockhart. But as he stepped onto the landing, he came to an abrupt halt, staring at the small window set into the double doors that marked the start of a corridor signposted spell damage. A man was peering out at them, all of his nose pressed against the glass. He had wavy blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a broad, vacant smile that revealed dazzling white teeth. "Blimey," said Ron, also staring at the man. "Oh my goodness," said Hermione suddenly, sounding breathless. "Professor Lockhart." Their ex-Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher pushed open the doors and moved toward them, wearing a long, lilac dressing gown. "Well, hello there," he said. "I expect you'd like my autograph, would you?" "Hasn't changed much, has he?" Harry muttered to Ginny, who grinned. How are you, Professor?" said Ron, sounding slightly guilty. It had been Ron's malfunctioning wand that had damaged Professor Lockhart's memory so badly that he had landed here in the first place. Though, as Lockhart had been attempting to permanently wipe Harry and Ron's memories at the time, Harry's sympathy was limited. This actually raised sort of a different question for me, which is the idea around what actually is magic in Harry Potter. It seems like Ron's broken wand was in some way responsible for how poorly this spell went for Lockhart. So I'm kind of wondering if wands are acting as a sort of regulator here. So think about it like scuba diving, and the wand is the scuba regulator that takes the high pressure air in the tank and converts it into a pressure that you can breathe. I think wands are basically tapping into this infinite magical force and reducing it down to a level that doesn't rip the whole world apart, apparently. I don't know if anyone's really discussed what exactly magic is in Harry Potter. It's not like midichlorians, but is it some separate force entirely? Does anyone know? The thing that this also brings up, though, is I kind of wonder if it's a little bit of an inverse situation to some of the other spells, where skill was a determining factor in how dangerous the spell was. It seems like, potentially, if you're less skilled at this, it might be more dangerous. Lockhart is an example of this, but seemingly if the spell goes wrong, it's actually worse for the person it's being cast on than if you're very skilled at it. If you're skilled at it, you seem to be able to target specific memories, like in the first example, where they just wipe the exact instance that just happened from the muggle's memory. If you're not, it seems like it just kind of destroys your entire mind. I think there's different articles that say Lockhart never recovered, so one incident seems to have removed his brain function pretty permanently, because it's more than just forgetting things. Because in Chamber of Secrets, after Lockhart hits himself with the spell, he's asking Harry and Ron if they live in the Chamber of Secrets, which is not a normal thing to ask people. It's not something that you would realistically think was true. If you were just forgetting, you'd be like, how did I end up here? Why did you take me here? Not, do you live in the Chamber of Secrets? That's a ridiculous thing to think. So clearly, Obliviate, in the worst case, is doing a lot more than just wiping your memories. It's sort of like wiping your senses out as well. And for all those reasons, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5, because it is incredibly dangerous, seemingly a pretty low bar for entry. And if it goes wrong, it goes real wrong. Gemino. Up next is the Gemino Curse, or Gemino? I don't know what the difference is. It seems like maybe the charm version is Gemino and the curse version is Gemino. Not totally clear. Either way, this is a spell that doubles things. So obviously, there's gonna be some problems. First, it creates near identical copies. It multiplies those copies potentially uncontrollably in the curse version. And the real only distinction here is that the copies seem to degrade faster, but it also seems like that's not always the case based on what we see in the text. The doubling charm has caused trouble from its discovery. Many disputes have arisen around the question of whether a copy created by the Gemino curse is of equal value to its pair. As the two are identical at first, it's impossible to know, although the copy usually rots or tarnishes much more quickly. One unfortunate quirk of this spell, which has never been successfully overcome, is that nobody can halt it but the original spellcaster. If, for whatever reason, he or she is interrupted, the object will continue to multiply for hours or even days until the copies start to degrade. So, off the bat, there's a few things to talk about. First and foremost is the idea of pretty much immediate economic collapse. If you could copy gold, you would have infinite gold, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot stopping that from happening. We see examples of goblins being able to tell the difference between leprechaun gold and real gold. It's not clear if leprechaun gold is magically copied gold or a different type of gold, but they can tell the difference, so I assume they would be able to tell the difference with duplicate gold as well. The long counter was manned by goblins sitting on high stools, serving the first customer of the day. Hermione, Ron, and Travers headed towards an old goblin who was examining a thick gold coin through an hourglass. Hermione allowed Travers to step ahead of her on the pretext of explaining features of the hall to Ron. The goblin tossed the coin he was holding aside, said to nobody in particular, "Leprechaun," and then greeted Travers. Goblins may know the difference, but I don't think everyday people know the difference. The second problem is this sort of weaponization of this. We see an example within Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, where the objects continue to duplicate, potentially crushing the people intruding on that vault. Harry shone his lit wand around the vault. Its beam fell upon glittering jewels. He saw the fake sword of Gryffindor lying on a high shelf amongst a jumble of chains. Ron and Hermione had lit their wands too, and were examining the piles of objects surrounding them. Harry, could this be... Ah! Hermione screamed in pain, and Harry turned his wand on her in time to see a jeweled goblet tumbling from her grip. But as it fell, it split, becoming a shower of goblets, so that a second later, with a great clatter, the floor was covered in identical cups rolling in every direction, the original impossible to discern amongst them. "It burned me," moaned Hermione, sucking her blistered fingers. "They have added Gemino and Flagrante curses," said Griphook. "Everything you touch will burn and multiply, but the copies are worthless. And if you continue to handle the treasure, you will eventually be crushed to death by the weight of expanding gold." Obviously, this is a problem. It expands indefinitely, obviously creating matter out of nothing, but that's kind of beside the point. The fact that you can combine it with curses means that, I don't know if you can do it on anything besides this burning curse, but there's probably some potential combinations that would be worse than doubling and burning. If, according to the first bit of text, it could duplicate for days on end, you could pretty easily bury an entire city in flaming trash. Before you say Gamp's Law stops all of this, I don't know if it does. I think Gamp's Law stops you from creating things like food, but there are other examples of people duplicating food that doesn't seem to be an issue. Maybe there's less nutritional value or no nutritional value in the food, but that raises a sort of different question. Sure, food might be less useful, but you could duplicate other things that would still have value. Imagine you duplicated a blanket. That duplicate blanket would still keep you warm, wouldn't it? If not, then what would be the point? So what happens when you duplicate things and you can still get value out of them when you duplicate them? Not everything has to be gold. Maybe you're limited when you're duplicating gold, though I don't think that's true either. But if you duplicated things that had value and use and utility, you would essentially crash the market and the demand for all of those things immediately, because there would be no scarcity anymore. You'd have an infinite supply of blankets. So why would you ever buy another one? Stepping back to the gold one for a second, we see that excerpt where the goblin can tell that it's leprechaun gold, but we see other examples where normal human beings, like Ron, don't know the difference between gold and leprechaun gold. And if you're duplicating real gold, I don't even think you'd be able to tell the difference at all. The problem with this is that the stuff degrades over time. So sure, maybe in a week it would be obviously fake, but what about the second that you're paying for stuff? You could duplicate stuff, give someone fake money, pay for it that way, and by the time they realize that it's fake, you're long gone. That in its own right is grounds for hyperinflation to the infinite degree. Just because it's detectable doesn't mean it's preventable in any sense of the word. Ron doesn't know that leprechaun gold disappears in Goblet of Fire, and he grew up in this world. How do you stop someone from just duplicating real gold and paying for everything with it, and then skipping town the second they're found out? And put aside blankets and gold and whatever, like what about other commodities? Oil is always an example. What if you just duplicate oil and you burn it before it degrades? Do you ever need to use a gas station? I know this is not, they don't use cars, but like, you know, other commodities. Medicine, what if you duplicate medicine? I guess they don't need to use medicine either. What if I duplicate books? Is there any purpose of buying a book anymore if you can copy everything and just read a copy of it? Whatever. There's commodities that I feel like you could duplicate, would have utility in the moment, and would be used up by the time that they start to degrade. For all those reasons, I'm giving this a 5 out of 5. This is potential to completely collapse everything in society. And frankly, it seems so simple and easy to do that I don't know how it hasn't happened yet. I will say the one alternative explanation here would be that instead of it collapsing society, you could potentially, I guess, create some sort of utopia where it's a post-scarcity economy where no one is in need of anything, I guess, anymore. It's clearly not the case because some people are still poor, so it's not being done, but I don't know what stops it from happening. This is clearly a 5 out of 5. This would absolutely wreak havoc on any rational society. Frankly, the fact that it doesn't just means none of this makes sense in the first place. Mobilarbus. This is actually going to be another combo one between Mobilarbus and Mobilicorpus, and potentially hundreds of other hyper-specific spells, but let's start with these two. Mobilarbus, from what we can tell, is a spell specifically designed to move trees. Somewhere above him, Hermione whispered, "Mobilarbus." The Christmas tree beside their table rose a few inches off the ground, drifted sideways, and landed with a soft thump right in front of their table, hiding them from view. Staring at the dense lower branches, Harry saw 4 sets of chair legs move back from the table right beside theirs, then heard the grunts and sighs of the teachers and minister as they sat down. So Mobilarbus is a spell that Hermione casts specifically to move a tree, like a few inches. Why she doesn't use Wingardium Leviosa, I guess we don't totally know, although maybe this goes back to it not being a controllable spell, and this one is. Regardless, we also see examples with the same root word, mobile, which, obviously means move, and then a separate word added onto the end for a specific thing that's being moved. So we have Mobilicorpus, which seems to be used to move bodies. The drawing room was full of silent people sitting at a long and ornate table. The room's unusual furniture had been pushed carelessly up against the walls. Illumination came from a roaring fire beneath a handsome marble metal mantelpiece surmounted by a gilded mirror. Snape and Yaxley lingered for a moment on the threshold. As their eyes grew accustomed to the lack of light, they were drawn upward to the strangest feature of the scene, an apparently unconscious human figure hanging upside down over the table, revolving slowly as if suspended by an invisible rope, and reflected in the mirror and in the bare, polished surface of the table below. None of the people seated underneath this singular sight was looking at it except for a pale young man sitting almost directly below it. He seemed unable to prevent himself from glancing upward every minute or so. So this is in the first chapter of Deathly Hallows. Voldemort has suspended someone up on the ceiling with Mobilicorpus. So it's another example that does something very specific, but both seem to have pretty limited uses. They basically float or move an object like some sort of limited telekinesis. The worst case scenarios are pretty similar to Wingardium Leviosa, where basically you can just move heavy things and throw them at people, something that you can do without magic as well. They're ridiculously specific, and I don't think that makes them very useful in any sense of the word. Because why would you learn these spells when you can use one spell for all of them? Leviosa seems to do all of these things, including be able to slightly control stuff, except for moving bodies, which for whatever reason has its own spell. I guess Mobilicorpus is also useful in combat, which if you're powerful enough, like Voldemort, it basically gives you the ability to bloodbend Avatar style. I think this is maybe what we see in Goblet of Fire, earlier on without realizing what we're seeing. "We bow to each other, Harry," said Voldemort, bending a little, but keeping his snake-like face upturned to Harry. "Come, the niceties must be observed. Dumbledore would like you to show manners. Bow to death, Harry." The Death Eaters were laughing again. Voldemort's lipless mouth was smiling. Harry did not bow. He was not going to let Voldemort play with him before killing him. He was not going to give him that satisfaction. "I said bow," Voldemort said, raising his wand, and Harry felt his spine curve as though a huge, invisible hand were bending him ruthlessly forward, and the Death Eaters laughed harder than ever. "Very good," said Voldemort softly. As he raised his wand, the pressure bearing down upon Harry lifted too. "And now you face me like a man, straight-backed and proud, the way your father died." So I guess in the extreme examples, when you're very powerful and you're up against someone that is not a powerful witch or wizard, you could potentially manipulate their body. That seems like relatively niche applications of this. So overall, Mobila blank spells are incredibly niche, specific, and not that useful. And so I'm giving it a rating of 1 out of 5. Basically harmless fluff magic tricks. Why do you need a different spell for every single noun that you're trying to move around? Just use a different spell. Or your hands. Bedazzling Hexes. Yet another example of grouping together a bunch of spells that do pretty much the same thing. There's Bedazzling Hexes, there's Disillusionment Charms, and then I'm also throwing in Hominem Revelio, which seems to counter all of these things without any effort at all. They are all different sides of the same three-sided coin. For starters, they're pretty easy to cast. This is an announcement from the Ministry of Magic and Half-Blood Prince. Protecting your home and family against dark forces. Review the security arrangements around your house, making sure that all family members are aware of emergency measures such as shield and disillusionment charms, and in the case of underage family members, side-along apparition. Even seemingly for inexperienced wizards and witches that are just going about their everyday lives, even they can cast shield and disillusionment charms, so there's not like there's a huge skill barrier to casting the spells to begin with, but there are apparently better and worse versions of these charms. "Read it," he told her, pushing his mother's letter into her hand. "Read it. Dumbledore had the cloak, Hermione. Why else would he want it? He didn't need a cloak. He could perform a disillusionment charm so powerful that he made himself completely invisible without one." Obviously, like other spells, there seems to be a range of expertise here. Everything from probably like slight transparency to something that Dumbledore can cast, which is like perfect invisibility. Regardless of all of these things, they seem to be befuddled by Hominem Revelio, which is a spell that puts a waypoint marker above someone's head. Let's let Harry explain it. "You lying piece of filth," shouted the wizard named Selwyn. "You've never seen Potter in your life, have you? Thought you'd lure us here to kill us, did you? And you'll think you'll get your girl back like this? I swear, Potter's upstairs." "Hominem Revelio," said the voice at the foot of the stairs. Harry heard Hermione gasp, and he had the odd sensation that something was swooping low over him, immersing his body in its shadow. "There's someone up there all right, Selwyn," said the second man sharply. If I remember correctly, I think Harry and Hermione are under the invisibility cloak, which seemingly doesn't do anything to protect them, despite it being this mythical Deathly Hallow. We already know back in like Chamber of Secrets that Dumbledore did this same thing, cast Hominem Revelio and saw through the cloak, but apparently anyone can do it. Really, the main issue here is that you'd have to be pretty vigilant all the time about bad actors becoming invisible around you, but there's so many ways to counter this that I don't know if it's that much of an issue. I think anything that would be at risk would have counters in place to stop bad actors that were using this. For instance, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione try to rob Gringotts, there's what's called the Thief's Downfall, which is the waterfall that wipes away any sort of magical enchantments. They were deeper than Harry had ever penetrated within Gringotts. They took a hairpin bend at speed and saw ahead of them, with seconds to spare, a waterfall pounding over the track. Harry heard Griphook shout, "No!" but there was no breaking. They zoomed through it. Water filled Harry's eyes and mouth. He could not see or breathe. Later, to Harry's horror, he saw that she was no longer Bellatrix. Instead, she stood there in overlarge robes, sopping wet and completely herself. Ron was red-haired again and beardless again, and they were realizing it as they looked at each other, feeling their own faces. The thief's downfall, said Griphook, clambering to his feet and looking back at the deluge onto the tracks, which Harry knew now had been more than water. It washes away all enchantment, all magical concealment. They know there are imposters in Gringotts. They have set off defenses against us. So there's water that wipes away all methods of concealment, but even still, I just have to ask, couldn't they just go through this and then cast the spells again, or drink more Polyjuice Potion and just re-camouflage themselves? What's stopping them from doing that? In fact, not 2 pages later, Hermione diverts the magic from the waterfall with a spell. It's really pretty easy to counter that as well. There's problems with all this, but I feel like in super high-risk situations, they would have obvious security measures that would stop things like this, basically like metal detectors, but for invisible people. So I feel like the potential for actual danger and risk here is actually not that great. To summarize, there are counters. It's somewhat skill dependent. You can cast better versions of this if you're more powerful. So there's potentially a pretty large espionage risk, I guess, but there's also plenty of ways to stop it from happening, and most important things would probably be protected in some way. And overall, it feels like social paranoia would be the largest risk here. For all those reasons, I think a 3 out of 5 is appropriate. The Fidelius Charm. This is without a doubt one of the more confusing spells in the series, and that's in a series where there's time travel that doesn't make any sense at all. The Fidelius Charm is basically a spell that protects secrets. Allegedly, that can extend to a place, a plan, a fact, all of the above, none of the above. It's not incredibly clear. That secret, whatever it is sealed within a living person, and that secret is then impossible to discover. You can't stumble across it, you can't read about it in a book. It has to be divulged from the secret keeper. An immensely complex spell, he said squeakily, involving the magical concealment of a secret inside a single living soul. The information is hidden inside the chosen person, or secret keeper, and is henceforth impossible to find, unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. As long as the secret keeper refuses to speak, you-know-who could search the village where Lily and James were staying for years and never find them, not even if he had his nose pressed up against their sitting room window. This was the topic of a poll that I put out, a couple polls actually, about what actually was the secret that Peter Pettigrew was keeping about Lily and James. Was it the house itself, or was it the idea of where the Potters were hiding? Or I guess option 3, was it the Potters themselves? It's not clear. First of all, if it was the location of the house, in the same way that the Order of the Phoenix headquarters is hidden by Dumbledore, Grimmauld Place, that has its own problems. Wormtail would have revealed the location of the Potter's house to Voldemort, and Voldemort could go there and kill them, but no one else would be able to find it because Peter Pettigrew would not have revealed that secret to anyone else. So when Harry and Hermione go back later in the series, Hermione shouldn't be able to see the house if that was the secret being kept. It's the same as number 12 Grimmauld Place being kept a secret. Because importantly, even the subjects of the secret cannot reveal the secret from J.K. Rowling's own mouth. In other words, a secret, e.g. the location of a family in hiding, like the Potters, is enchanted so that it is protected by a single keeper. In our example, Peter Pettigrew, aka Wormtail. Thenceforth, nobody else, not even the subjects of the secret themselves, can divulge the secret. I guess to stop, if James is captured from revealing the location to their house, that's a problem. Again, because Peter has only told Voldemort about the location of the house. Even if everyone previously aware of the location keeps that knowledge, new people wouldn't know. Hermione would not know where the Potter's house was. It should be invisible, the same way that number 12 Grimmauld Place is before they're let in on the secret. That said, everything points towards the house and the location of the house being the secret. There's a note from Lily Potters about James being frustrated. James is getting a bit frustrated, shut up here. He tries not to show it, but I can tell. Also, Dumbledore still got his invisibility cloak, so no chance of little excursions. It's almost assuredly the location of the house that's the secret, but it still begs the question about why anybody else can see it after the fact. There's examples of other witches and wizards leaving flowers and notes at the location of the Potter's house as like a tribute. How is that possible? The only reason I can think of is that when Voldemort goes in there, kills them, and sort of like blows the building up, that somehow ends the charm from existing. Because otherwise, that house should be gone forever. So how does this apply to the real world? I think it's somewhat similar to the Obliviate situation, where there's a pretty high chance for some sort of secret to be covered up. In this case, it's even worse, because conceivably the government could just cast a Fidelius Charm around some sort of secret and no one would ever be the wiser. And because apparently if the secret keeper dies, then the secret goes to the grave with them. There's a lot of potential to sort of make a secret keeper and then assassinate the secret keeper and then the secret's gone forever. That has some pretty ridiculous implications. You could also apply this to like corporate cover-ups. What happens if Enron uses the Fidelius on everyone and it just sort of like hides shell companies forever? Bernie Madoff Fidelius's people, and eventually he runs out of money when the Ponzi scheme collapses around him. But there's a lot of potential applications for this sort of thing. The other problematic piece of this, I think, is the idea of information dying off. If you think, for an example, that information spreads kind of like a virus, you need the secret keeper to spread that knowledge over time, because no one else can find it out unless they're told about it, which means that if people don't continuously spread this information, it will die off eventually. People will stop spreading it and the information will cease to be known. So if you made a discovery, I don't know, imagine a company patents some sort of cure for cancer, and Fidelius is that cure so that people can't copy it. Eventually that dies off. People aren't told enough about it, and then eventually that secret is taken to the grave and it disappears forever. I think the only saving grace in all this is that you can't Fidelius existing information. Everyone that already knows the information will continue to know that information, even if you cast a Fidelius Charm around it. So you can't decide that you're the only one that gets to know how to make bread anymore, because everyone knows how to do that. So if you Fidelius it, everyone can already know about it. Granted, I say that, and not everyone knows how to make bread. Who's the secret keeper? And if they don't tell anyone, do we lose the recipe for bread forever? Just because you know about it doesn't mean you can spread it to new people. Only the secret keeper can do that. So I don't know. Maybe we don't know how to make bread anymore. The thing is, this isn't even circumvented by what we know about how the secret is spread. We know this from Deathly Hallows. Mr. Weasley had explained that after the death of Dumbledore, their secret keeper, each of the people to whom Dumbledore had confided Grimmauld Place's location had become a secret keeper in turn. And as there were around 20 of us, that greatly dilutes the power of the Fidelius Charm. 20 times as many opportunities for the Death Eaters to get the secret out of somebody. We can't expect it to hold much longer. A couple things off of this. So first of all, clearly, just because you knew about the secret beforehand doesn't mean you get to then spread the secret, because only the secret keeper and the people they've divulged the information to become secret keepers. The other problem here is that it's stated elsewhere that the information in a Fidelius Charm has to be freely given. It can't be tortured out of someone, which kind of leads me to the worst plot hole in all of this, which is there's really not a reason for Sirius to not be the secret keeper for the Potters. It's outright said that it can't be tortured out of someone. It has to be freely given, which means I really doubt Sirius would have freely given that information to Voldemort, and in that case, the Potters are still alive. There's not a good reason to use Peter Pettigrew in any conceivable path here. Honestly, there's not a reason not to use Dumbledore. He is clearly the best person to hide the secret, bar none. The other alternative would be that James and Lily should have been able to cast the Fidelius Charm on their own house and have been their own secret keepers. This gets into an area that I truly think is probably some sort of oversight and plot hole in the series. J.K. Rowling just needed a device in which to frame the Sirius Peter Pettigrew betrayal story in, and I don't think it really works all the way through the whole story. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that one, because it kind of unraveled more and more as I kept digging into it. You can let me know. I didn't even rate it. Yeah, so this one I think is a 4 out of 5. It's clearly, maybe it's a 5. If there's a scenario where we can erase the recipe for bread and all other knowledge, then it's probably a 5. But otherwise, it's a 4. Imperious Curse. Alright, if you've been paying attention, there's one unforgivable spell that I haven't mentioned, the Imperious Curse. The Imperious Curse is something that allows you to subjugate someone and make them do whatever you want, seemingly with just about no limitations. So, let's take a look at how it happens. And we can do that by watching Harry cast it successfully on his very first try. Act now, whispered Griphook in Harry's ear. The Imperious Curse. Harry raised the hawthorn wand beneath the cloak, pointed it at the old goblin, and whispered, for the first time in his life, Imperio. A curious sensation shot down Harry's arm, a feeling of tingling warmth that seemed to flow from his mind down the sinews and veins connecting him to the wand and the curse it had just cast. The goblin took Bellatrix's wand, examined it closely, and then said, "Ah, you have had a new wand made, Madame Lestrange." Harry just effortlessly casts this mental domination spell the first try with no practice whatsoever, and it goes flawlessly, which is a little bit of a hint to where I think this spell is going. When it affects people, we can see how they react based again on Harry's control of that goblin. "We need him," said Griphook. "We cannot enter a vault without a Gringotts goblin, and we need the clankers." "Imperio," said Harry again. His voice echoed through the stone passage as he felt again the sense of heady control that flowed from brain to wand. Bograd submitted once more to his will, his befuddled expression changing to one of polite indifference. Even though Harry's a skilled wizard, we don't exactly know where he ranks in the world of powerful wizards. He is still only like 17 or 18 here, so he is not necessarily the world's most powerful wizard, and yet it doesn't seem that difficult to subjugate someone completely. If you're able to do that, they're kind of just passive puppets that you can control and make them do your will, which creates a whole bunch of problems. Least of the matter is that it works at range, apparently, and you don't even need to make eye contact or anything, and there's no skill barrier, there's no intent to do harm barrier. I guess this is probably the reason it's an unforgivable spell. Supposedly, it requires focus and concentration to maintain, but in the same breath, I don't think that's true, as we see different examples in Deathly Hallows. "My lord, I have good news on that score. I have, with difficulty and after great effort, succeeded in placing an Imperious Curse upon Pious Thickness." Many of those sitting around Yaxley looked impressed. His neighbor, Dullahav, a man with a long twisted face, clapped him on the back. This is, I think it's Yaxley saying that he's done this. Presumably this is something that's still in effect. It wasn't just, cast once and then forgotten about or discontinued. It's a continuous effect that he's taken control of Pious Thickness. It's not just a one and done thing, which means that you can have these sleeper agents working at a distance without concentration or extra effort. And one example, I guess, of this is that you could probably put someone under Imperious control and then have them repeat a unbreakable vow to you and forever be indebted to your service. And I don't know what would stop you from doing that. Some magical plot hole armor that J.K. Rowling would say, the unbreakable vow has to be under your own control to make or something like that, but who knows. I will say there is one example of being able to fight the curse. That is, of course, with Harry Potter. So apparently there's some undefinable willpower requirement to fight against the Imperious Curse, and willpower is essentially J.K. Rowling's plot armor to protect Harry. He just has to try harder and then he can do just about anything. But I asked you whether you wanted me to do that again, said Voldemort softly. Answer me. Imperio. And Harry felt, for the third time in his life, the sensation that his mind had been wiped of all thought. Ah, it was bliss not to think. It was as though he were floating, dreaming. Just answer no. Say no. Just answer no. I will not, said a stronger voice in the back of his head. I won't answer. Just answer no. I won't do it. I won't say it. Just answer no. I won't. And these words burst from Harry's mouth. They echoed through the graveyard, and the dream state was lifted as suddenly as though cold water had been thrown over him. Back rushed the aches that the Crutiatus Curse had left all over his body. Back rushed the realization of where he was and what he was facing. Harry's the only person that's avoided Avada Kedavra, and he's also apparently the only person that can avoid the Imperious Curse. Just because he's Harry, so of course he can. This is kind of the constant issue with J.K. Rowling, is throwing up these sort of vague, undefinable constraints or lack thereof in every situation. It's either A, Harry can do things because he's got more willpower, or other examples are like Dementors or monsters that like can't be killed but are just sort of like it follows monsters that just slowly move towards you forever, can't do anything about them. It's these kind of issues that are glaring the more you look into them. In terms of a ranking, it's a bit tricky. On one hand, it's incredibly easy to cast, seemingly has just about no barrier to doing it. It seems like it's probably pretty hard to resist, so it's much easier to cast than it is to resist, which is its own problem. Unless you're Harry, then you can cast it and resist it because you're invincible. There's a lot of chance for this to go substantially wrong for society. But on the other hand, I don't think this breaks things in the same way that the Gemino Curse does, or the Fidelius Charm being able to erase human knowledge from existence. So all in all, I will give it a 4 out of 5. And that's gonna do it. That's 18 spells ranked from harmless party trick to faster than light relativistic missile destroying the entire planet in spell form. Do you agree with the ratings? Do you disagree? Did I miss a spell? Did I forget about an effect that I should have been thinking about? Let me know in the comments what you think. If you liked this video, you'll probably like this one that is all about plot holes and everything wrong with the Harry Potter universe, because boy howdy, there's a lot of it. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.